It was supposed to be a peaceful Sunday, just a man installing his new Wi-Fi. But when a woman called 911 because he didn't look like he belonged, what happened next stunned the entire country. The man in cuffs turned out to be more than just a tech expert. And the woman behind the curtain. She wasn't just a nosy neighbor. What were the cops really walking into, and why did one of them whisper, "We've got a situation"? Malcolm Reed had no idea his Sunday would end with sirens. He had only lived in the neighborhood for a week, but already he felt the weight of being watched. The air was calm that morning, with birds chirping and sprinklers hissing across trimmed lawns. Malcolm stood outside his new home, crouched near the front porch with a screwdriver in one hand and a brand new modem in the other. He was swapping out his internet router, trying to hardwire the connection for better security. Across the street, behind half-closed curtains, Karen Whitaker watched him like a hawk. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she clutched her cordless phone. To her, a black man handling wires outside a house he probably didn't own looked suspicious. She dialed 911. Her voice trembling with manufactured panic. "There's a man messing with the cables outside that house. He looks like he's trying to break in." The dispatcher, trained to take every call seriously, sent a patrol car immediately. Within minutes, the sound of a siren pierced the sleepy street, followed by the flash of blue and red lights bouncing off garage doors. Malcolm, still adjusting the wire clamps, looked up confused as two officers stepped out of their cruiser, hands already resting on their belts. "Sir, can you step away from the wires?" one of them called out. "Put the tools down slowly." Malcolm blinked. "I live here. I'm installing my router." He raised his hands, palms open, as if that simple motion might shield him from the building tension. Karen peered out her window, arms crossed triumphantly. One of the officers approached with cautious steps, while the other circled toward the door. The scene looked absurd. Malcolm, wearing house slippers and a college hoodie, being treated like a threat for touching his own property. A small crowd started to gather. Neighbors peeked out from their driveways, some filming with their phones. Malcolm's heart pounded, not just from fear, but from humiliation. "Do you have ID?" the officer asked. Malcolm nodded slowly, gesturing toward the front door. "It's inside, just let me, no sudden moves," came the reply. As Malcolm tried to explain, the officers moved in, cuffing him without resistance. "This is insane," Malcolm muttered, trying to keep his voice even. From across the street, Karen smiled, clearly proud of herself. "Better safe than sorry," she muttered. But just as quickly as the cuffs were secured, one of the officers glanced at the name Malcolm Reed on the ID retrieved from his pocket. His brow furrowed. He tapped the screen on his in-car computer, and something changed. A beep sounded. Then another. A red flag lit up on the screen. "Stand by," the officer whispered to his partner. They exchanged a look. The tension didn't dissipate, it thickened. What began as a routine check on a suspicious person was suddenly morphing into something entirely different. Within seconds, their posture changed. The cuffs stayed on, but the questions changed tone. "Mr. Reed, do you have any reason your name would be flagged by the Department of Homeland Security?" Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Why don't you ask them?" he said calmly. From that moment, everything shifted. Not just the officer's tone, but the mood in the neighborhood. Karen, still watching from her window, didn't know it yet, but her call had sparked something far bigger than she'd imagined. Malcolm Reed wasn't just a man with a router. He was a quiet storm in the world of cybersecurity. Born in Detroit, raised by a single mother who worked nights cleaning offices, Malcolm's first exposure to computers came from a busted-up desktop a neighbor threw out. He rebuilt it using parts he found in the trash, learning coding not from school but from trial and error and public library books. By age 14, he was helping local barbershops and churches secure their networks, earning pocket money while keeping his community connected. He had no choice but to grow up fast. By the time he turned 21, he had a computer science degree and 2 job offers from companies that hadn't realized he was black until the video interviews. Both jobs ghosted him. So, he pivoted. Instead of chasing acceptance, Malcolm built something of his own. He started a non-profit that provided free digital security workshops in underserved schools and shelters. His work caught the attention of a federal cybersecurity task force that was quietly recruiting civilian partners to help track domestic cyber threats. Malcolm was different from the usual consultants they brought in. He wasn't a suit. He didn't talk in jargon. But he could break down a complex network vulnerability like he was explaining a recipe. His real value, though, came from seeing patterns, little details others missed. In one case, he traced a hacking attempt on a city power grid to an old warehouse server linked to a white supremacist group posing as a wellness retreat. That discovery earned him the unofficial nickname the Ghost Signal Hunter in certain government circles. Still, he never bragged. He didn't wear badges. He never flashed credentials. He believed in doing the work, not the show. When his apartment in the city was broken into, and his name was plastered across a hate blog, he knew it was time to go quiet. He packed up and moved to the suburbs, picking a small house on a quiet block, hoping he could lay low, maybe live like everyone else for once. What Malcolm didn't know was that his move to that specific neighborhood would stir more than just prejudice. The neighborhood had its own secrets. And one of them lived right across the street. Karen Whitaker, with her curated lawn and forced smile, had been watching Malcolm from day one. She waved but never smiled. She watched but never spoke. And now, with one phone call, she had turned Malcolm into a suspect. What she didn't know was that she'd also triggered a digital review of every Wi-Fi signal within a 100-yard radius. Because of his connection to federal systems, Malcolm's detainment activated an alert that began scanning nearby networks to ensure he wasn't in danger. That scan was already running, before the cuffs even clicked shut. The data it returned would flip the entire case upside down. But for now, Malcolm sat in silence in the back of a police cruiser, staring straight ahead, remembering his mother's voice telling him to stay calm, always stay calm. He was used to people seeing him as a threat. What he wasn't used to was the system beginning to shift in his favor. Back at the precinct, his name set off more alerts. Files began to unlock. A call was made from an unmarked Washington line. An agent named Rivera, who had worked with Malcolm on a case 2 years ago, picked up the phone. When she heard his name, her tone changed. "Hold him safely. I'm on my way." No one had told Malcolm yet. He sat waiting, not knowing the storm that was building outside the station. He thought he was alone. He wasn't. The system had always been watching him. Now, it was watching the people who tried to bring him down. The street had mostly gone quiet again, but tension still hung in the air. Malcolm sat cuffed in the back of the patrol car, the sun glinting off the glass like a spotlight on a man wrongly accused. Inside the car, the two officers stared at the screen on their dashboard, unsure what to make of the red alert blinking next to Malcolm's name. It wasn't the kind of flag they were used to. This wasn't a warrant or a missing person match. This was a secure notice from a federal agency with instructions they couldn't override. The younger officer stepped out of the vehicle and leaned against the hood, glancing toward Karen's house, where she still stood watching like a queen surveying her domain. She didn't look worried. She looked pleased. The older officer stayed behind, rereading the notes on Malcolm's profile, trying to make sense of what kind of civilian collaborator had just been cuffed in his jurisdiction. Meanwhile, inside the cruiser, Malcolm didn't move. He kept his eyes forward, but his mind was racing. He'd felt this before. That creeping sense of judgment, the sharp edge of being misunderstood, the helplessness of having to explain your existence again and again. He wanted to scream, but instead, he breathed slowly, knowing better than to give anyone an excuse. The front door to his house was still open, router tools scattered on the porch like evidence. All he had wanted was a stronger connection, nothing more. But now, that single act had turned into a case, and somehow, that case was growing into something bigger. At the station, Rivera was already in motion. She wasn't the type to panic, but when she saw Malcolm's name pop up on her secure feed with a detainment alert, she grabbed her badge and keys and left without finishing her coffee. She had worked with Malcolm twice before and knew his value. She also knew the system wasn't built to protect people like him unless someone pulled strings. She was prepared to pull every one of them. Back in the neighborhood, something else had started happening. The system that flagged Malcolm was connected to an automated scan tool. It combed through local Wi-Fi networks, a standard safety feature in cases where federal collaborators might be compromised. As the scan ran silently in the background, it picked up something strange. A signal broadcasting from across the street. The network name caught the system's attention. gov_backdoor_14. It didn't belong to any government system. It wasn't encrypted properly. And it was transmitting far more data than a normal home network should. The flag went from yellow to red within seconds. Another alert was triggered, this time not for Malcolm, but for Karen Whitaker's address. 2 plainclothes officers from a separate unit, already on a mobile cyber task force, were rerouted to the area. They arrived without lights or noise, pulling into the neighborhood unnoticed. They carried portable network sniffers and equipment that looked more like telecom gear than law enforcement tools. As they walked slowly down the block, pretending to check a utility box, their instruments confirmed it. The signal from Karen's house wasn't just active, it was busy. It was uploading data to a server in Eastern Europe, known to host compromised law enforcement records and private citizen surveillance footage. The house they were standing in front of wasn't just home to a nosy neighbor. It was ground zero for something far more serious. Inside the patrol car, the younger officer's radio buzzed. He stepped away to answer it and returned looking pale. "We need to secure the scene," he said quickly. His partner looked confused. "You mean Reed's house?" "No," the younger one replied, glancing across the street. "Hers." At that moment, Karen noticed the men in plainclothes approaching her property. Her smile faltered. She stepped back inside and shut the door. What she didn't realize was that shutting the door wouldn't stop what was coming. Malcolm saw them too. The shift. The way the officers suddenly looked unsure. One of them returned to the cruiser and gently opened the door. "Mr. Reed, we need you to stay right here. We're sorting things out." Malcolm gave a small nod, though his eyes were fixed across the street. Something didn't feel right. And this time, it wasn't about him. The 2 plainclothes agents moved swiftly but silently, making their way around the side of Karen Whitaker's house. From the outside, it looked just like any other suburban home. Neatly trimmed hedges, porch furniture no one ever used, and a pair of ceramic gnomes by the steps. But beneath that perfect image, their scanners were picking up something far from normal. One of the agents knelt down by the basement vent and pulled out a slim receiver. The readings were clear, heavy data transfer, multiple signals bouncing off internal networks, and a secondary router hidden beneath a dummy SSID. It wasn't just suspicious. It was tactical. The lead agent radioed it in, requesting immediate backup and a search warrant. Across the street, Malcolm sat quietly in the cruiser, watching the agents but still unaware that the spotlight had shifted. Inside Karen's house, things were far from calm. She moved quickly through the kitchen, her jaw clenched tight. She opened a drawer beneath the microwave and pulled out a small burner phone, dialing a number she hadn't used in over a year. The line rang once before a robotic voice answered. "Code." She whispered a string of numbers followed by the phrase "door compromised." The line went dead. Karen rushed to the hallway, opened a closet, and pressed a panel that revealed a set of stairs leading down into a dim basement. What was hidden down there wasn't just old furniture or boxes. It was an entire server stack, humming quietly, surrounded by monitors filled with code and surveillance feeds. Karen had built a digital fortress. She wasn't just spying on the neighborhood. She was recording, cataloging, and selling data. Every smart device within reach had been tapped. Baby monitors, security cameras, thermostats. If it connected to the internet, she had found a way in. Her cover as a nosy, racist neighbor was part of a larger plan to stay invisible. People dismissed her as annoying, overly cautious, even prejudiced. No one ever suspected her of running a network used by domestic extremist groups to communicate and trade stolen information. The data coming from her house included police scanner records, traffic cam feeds, and even intercepted emails from local government officials. As the plainclothes agents approached her front door, now flanked by a newly arrived SWAT unit, Karen activated the emergency wipe sequence on one of the servers. Lights blinked and drives spun loudly. But it was already too late. The system had been quietly cloned by federal scanners moments earlier. The agents burst in, shouting commands. Karen didn't resist. She stood calmly at the top of the basement stairs, hands raised. Her only words, "I knew this day would come." Outside, the neighborhood watched in shock as Karen was led out in cuffs. The same woman who had called the police on Malcolm just hours earlier was now being placed into the back of a black SUV by agents with no badges showing. Neighbors whispered. Phones recorded. Malcolm stared in disbelief. One of the agents walked over and opened the door of the patrol car. "You're free to go, Mr. Reed," he said. Malcolm stepped out slowly, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had left marks. "What's going on?" he asked. The agent simply replied, "You just helped us uncover something big." Malcolm looked around at the flashing lights, the agents, the neighbors who now looked away in shame. He felt no joy in Karen's arrest, only exhaustion. He had come to this neighborhood for peace, for a fresh start. Instead, he had been dragged into a war of secrets hiding beneath quiet lawns and friendly waves. As the SUV with Karen inside pulled away, Malcolm stood in his driveway, the breeze tugging at the hem of his hoodie. What else, he wondered, was this neighborhood hiding? As Karen's SUV disappeared down the road, the neighborhood slowly started returning to its usual calm, but not for Malcolm. Something about how quickly things had changed didn't sit right with him. One minute he was being treated like a criminal, the next he was being thanked for helping crack open a federal case. The shift was too fast, too clean. Inside his home, he locked the door and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the router he'd been installing earlier. It blinked steadily, as if nothing had happened. But Malcolm knew that wasn't true. The quiet hum of the machine in front of him now felt like it was whispering secrets. He powered it off and turned on his personal laptop, a secured device that only connected through a custom virtual network. He logged into a private channel and began tracing what had happened to him in real time. What he found made his chest tighten. The alert that had gone off when the police scanned his ID wasn't a standard protocol flag. It had been a silent ping sent to a high-clearance group inside the Department of Homeland Security. That kind of ping didn't go off for just anyone. It was reserved for individuals connected to sensitive investigations or projects that hadn't yet gone public. Malcolm realized something. He was being watched long before Karen made her call. The system that flagged her Wi-Fi had been tied to a larger surveillance dragnet that someone had quietly built without the knowledge of the local authorities. He scanned deeper and saw something stranger. His name had been tagged months earlier in a thread tied to an internal investigation into rogue surveillance cells operating in residential communities. One of those flagged areas. His neighborhood. And one of the code names in the operations logs. Observer 14. That matched the name of the fake network from Karen's house, gov_backdoor_14. That meant Karen wasn't acting alone. She was just one part of a bigger chain. Someone had set up sleeper operatives in quiet communities, hiding their activity behind everyday paranoia. Malcolm hadn't just stumbled into the situation, he had been placed near it. He dug into the file deeper and found classified annotations he wasn't supposed to have access to. But he had built the encryption layer himself years ago and still knew how to get around it. The logs revealed that Karen's data wasn't just being sold to criminals. It was also being funneled back to a private security firm under federal contract. They had created a system where false flags, like reporting suspicious activity, helped them identify anyone who reacted too calmly. Anyone who didn't fight. Anyone like Malcolm. He realized with a sick feeling that the system was designed to flush out people like him. People with the knowledge to notice hidden patterns. People who might discover the surveillance buried in everyday life. A knock at the door snapped him out of his thoughts. It was Rivera. She didn't come in uniform, just a hoodie and jeans, her badge barely visible at her side. "You figured it out, didn't you?" she asked without smiling. Malcolm nodded slowly. "Why me?" he asked. Rivera stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Because you see things the way we can't. Because you've never looked away. You were meant to find her." Malcolm's fists clenched. "You used me as bait." Rivera didn't argue. "Yes. But you weren't in danger." "Not really." Malcolm laughed bitterly. "You don't get to say that. I was cuffed in front of my neighbors." Rivera looked tired. "We had to be sure the net worked. And it did. You were the only one who could walk in and make her panic." Malcolm leaned back against the wall, overwhelmed. "So what now?" he asked. Rivera handed him a small device, no bigger than a phone charger. "You keep doing what you do. Quietly. We'll be watching, but not in the way she was." As she left, Malcolm stood still, feeling the weight of the truth settle in. He hadn't just moved into a new neighborhood. He had stepped into a hidden war. And somehow, without knowing it, he had just won a battle no one else knew was happening. In the days that followed Karen Whitaker's arrest, the neighborhood found itself at the center of a media storm. News vans lined the streets. Reporters camped outside front lawns, knocking on doors, hoping to catch a quote or glimpse of the man who had gone from suspect to silent hero. Malcolm watched the chaos from his living room window with the blinds half drawn. He hadn't asked for any of this. He hadn't wanted to become a symbol or a trending topic. All he'd wanted was faster internet and a little peace. Now, his face was being used in thumbnails next to headlines like "Cyber Savior" and "Caught by Her Own Paranoia." But Malcolm refused to speak to the press. He turned down every interview, every podcast, every documentary offer. He didn't want his story sold. It didn't belong to the world. It was his, and it had already cost too much. He spent the week reconnecting the router, this time without interruption. He fixed the wiring, reset the security, and added new firewalls. But even as he did, the air felt different. The neighbors who once looked at him with suspicion now waved with forced politeness. The same people who'd recorded him being cuffed now acted like it had never happened. One even baked a pie. Malcolm accepted it with a quiet nod, knowing it was more about their guilt than his forgiveness. What surprised him most was the letter he found in his mailbox, unsigned. It simply read, "We knew something was off about her. We just didn't want to be the ones to say it. Thank you." He didn't know who sent it, but it landed with a heavy thud in his chest. Rivera stopped by once more. This time, there was no warning. She sat with him on the back porch, looking out over the small yard he hadn't had time to enjoy yet. "There's talk about pulling you in full time," she said casually. "No more unofficial work. Benefits. Clearance. The whole thing." Malcolm shook his head. "I'm not sure I want to be part of a system that lets things get this far before doing something." Rivera didn't argue. She just nodded. "Sometimes we need someone outside to show us what we're missing on the inside." She left without another word. The following week, Malcolm returned to his roots. He held a small workshop at a local community center downtown, helping teens secure their devices, explaining how to spot phishing traps and protect their digital footprints. He didn't mention Karen. He didn't mention the case. He just talked about the importance of knowing who might be watching and how to protect yourself even when no one else will. The room was packed. No cameras. No hashtags. Just people listening. But as Malcolm left the building that night, he felt something strange. A dark car parked across the street with tinted windows and a faint blue light inside. He kept walking. The car didn't move. But he could feel eyes on him. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. In this new world, truth and secrecy lived side by side. Back in his house, Malcolm turned off the lights and stared out the window. He had exposed something big, but he also knew he hadn't seen the end of it. Systems like the one Karen was part of don't just die with one arrest. They rebuild. They hide deeper. He didn't know what would come next, but he was ready now. More ready than ever. The story the world saw was just the surface. What lay underneath still whispered through his walls, through networks, through silence. And Malcolm Reed was listening.